Humanity has been interested in life after death since the beginning, that is, what happens to us, what happens after our soul, once we have left this shadow. Many religions have built many theories and belief systems in this regard. One of them is reincarnation. As civilizations developed, they increasingly differentiated their beliefs into separate groups, so to speak. Since the Eastern religions are more philosophical and spiritual, they accepted reincarnation. However, within Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, or Jainism also thought and think differently about reincarnation. Certain subgroups of world religions believe in reincarnation. Reincarnation is Latin, and the literal translation is reincarnation to take on the flesh again, i.e., another physical body. The term appeared very long ago in the 6th century BC for the first time in the Indian and Greek philosophical traditions. Reincarnation means that our soul is our eternal life. Death does not exist as such because we used up our body. Our soul is something that waits longer and takes on another test, that is, our soul, our being, always remains the same. It just moves into a different and newly born body. There are already many forms of belief in the transmigration of the soul. Most of us agree that with each new incarnation, we continue the realization of our spiritual self where we left off in our previous life. The state of consciousness that always dominated when leaving the powder pod and moving to the next test. That is why it can happen that miracle children are born who, in many cases, are much smarter or wiser than adults. These children have already acquired a lot of knowledge in their previous lives. This whole universal process is called samsara. Samsara results in the cycle of death and rebirth, and samsara itself is controlled by karma, that is, the interaction of cause and effect. In short, if someone was a person of good intentions in his life, then you will have a more favorable rebirth. If you have bad intentions, then you will have a more unfavorable rebirth. Samsara does not only apply to people, you can also be reborn in the image of an animal or a plant. They are downright fascinating. But the mystique of reincarnation, the transmigration of souls, is also of interest to some representatives of the scientific world. Many professors of psychiatry have already graduated research on soul migration. Theodore Slanoy, professor of psychology at the University of Geneva, has written several books based on his research on reincarnation, soul seers, and telepathy. Swiss psychologist and psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung repeatedly emphasized the importance of human memory for the psychological study of soul migration and did a lot of research on dream interpretation. For example, we have heard that reincarnation is not necessarily an Eastern mystical week, but a phenomenon also researched by science. In today's episode, I brought you a case that is often referred to as one of the best documented reincarnation stories in the world, proof of reincarnation. Before we try to find answers to this rather powerful question, let me tell you this whole strange, somewhat scary, and really remarkable story. Bear with me and let's get acquainted with the strange and amazing case of the Pollock twins. In 1920, a boy was born in the city of Bristol, England, and his parents gave him the name John Pollock. John had been a Catholic since his youth. As a teenager, he met a girl named Florence, who served as a member of the Salvation Army. It is a little interesting that despite his Christian faith, John has always believed in reincarnation, and this belief was definitively committed to him when he read a book about the phenomenon at the age of 9. They got along well and soon established their joint venture, a food and milk delivery business. In the early 1940s, 2 boys were born one after the other, followed by a little girl in 1946, who was named Johanna Pollock. In 1951, the family moved to Hexham, Northampton. In the same year, their second daughter Jacqueline Pollock was born. The 2 girls soon became inseparable. Johanna, as an older sister, mothered her younger sister, who did not mind it. They often dressed up in different costumes and performed plays for their own amusement in the back garden. The girls loved their own hair and other people's hair. They usually combed their father's hair for long minutes, which of course John Pollock didn't mind. In the meantime, the Pollock couple had 2 more sons, so the family grew nicely. Jacqueline received a permanent injury on her face, forehead, right eye, and then a wound appeared on her nose, which became most visible in particularly cold weather. Besides this scar, Jacqueline had another striking identifying mark. A huge round dark birthmark was visible on the left side of her waist. The family lived a very harmonious life when the tragedy occurred on May 5, 1957. The two little girls, Jacqueline and Johanna, were walking to church with a friend named Anthony when a car drove onto the sidewalk and ran over them to death. The girls died almost immediately, and their friend Anthony suffered serious injuries. The boy died while being transported to the hospital. As it turned out, their killer was a woman suffering from mental problems named Marjorie's friend. She lost custody of her children in court that day due to her mental problems. In her final desperation, she started drinking large amounts of aspirin and phenobarbital. After that, she got into her car and started speeding. So it happened that the intoxicated woman lost control of the vehicle and ran onto the pavement, killing the 3 children. The woman was deemed punishable, and she was sent to a psychiatric institution. The case was so disturbing that it made headlines in Great Britain. I think it goes without saying that the parents, Florence and John, went through a hell of a lot when they lost their daughters. The Pollock couple completely collapsed. It was even more horrible for them that they lost Johanna and Jacqueline in such a senseless accident. For the first week after this hellish period, Florence tried to avoid thinking about the girls, but John talked about them almost every minute. He regularly had visions about the girls, and after a while, she started talking about how she felt the presence of the girls' spirits in the top room of their house in Hexham. So she often stayed there to be as close to them as possible. She considered this to be processing grief. However, when her husband came up with a rather scary thing one day, Florence freaked out. John Pollock said that listening to his prayers is what they found, and he supposedly received a message from God that their daughters would be reborn into the family. But he didn't want to hear about it. John regularly talked about Johanna and Jacqueline coming back to them. A few months later, Florence Pollock also got pregnant, but she rejected her husband's theory that this was a sign from God. John Pollock, however, kept insisting that their children would soon be among them again because Florence would give birth to a girl. But this seemed impossible, especially since the doctor who examined Florence always only heard one heartbeat during each examination. Moreover, neither John nor Florence's family had any births. So it seemed almost impossible that Florence would carry 2 fetuses under her heart. However, the almost unbelievable prediction came true despite the fact that there was no chance at all and there was nothing to indicate it. Florence gave birth to twin girls on the 4th of October 1958. To everyone's surprise, after the first shock, the mysteries only increased. The twin girls, born in October 1958, were named Gillian and Jennifer by their parents. After a thorough examination of the 2 babies, everyone was amazed. Even though the girls were identical twins, they showed different physical characteristics. Gillian's body was slim like Johanna's, even like Jennifer Jacqueline, it was a bit stockier. The twins were often reversed, they were born with symmetrical features. For example, if one of them has a larger mole on her right shoulder, the other will have such an identifying mark on her left shoulder. Jennifer had a large dark mole in exactly the same place as the 1957, and it was also found on Zarkin's waist. What is even more amazing is that on Jennifer's forehead, a line like this stretched a few centimeters. This white line was exactly the same place where, in 1954, at the age of 3, Zarkin injured her face when she fell into a pit. That her husband was right, a miracle happened. Their children, who had died more than a year ago, returned to them in new bodies. The doctors were amazed and puzzled by the birth of the twins because the twin girls knew things that they simply couldn't have known about. One time, when their parents took them for a walk, Gillian pointed to the school building and said, "This is the school we also went to." Jennifer, when they arrived at the playground next to the church, shouted, "We also used to play there." The Pollock couple was extremely shocked because the deceased Johanna and Jacqueline went to the school in question, and the 2 little girls really played a lot on the mentioned playground. How did Gillian and Jennifer know this, and why did they say that we also went or used to? Only the 3 of them were years old, they didn't go to school, and the mentioned playground wasn't very strange that when the children discovered the toys of their dead sisters, which the parents didn't have the heart to throw them away, they could identify the dolls by name. As Johanna and Jacqueline named them at the time, in fact, Gillian was able to list which toys Santa brought. Bizarrely, she pointed to the very dolls that they had actually bought during Santa Claus for their deceased daughters. Amazingly, on one occasion, Florence noticed that Jennifer was lying on the floor in Gillian's lap. Florence claims Gillian whispered the following to her brother, blood is coming out of your eyes. This happened when the car hit you." Another time, he pointed to the white line on Jennifer's forehead and said, "Jennifer got it when she fell into a pit." The connections between the twins and the two deceased girls kept growing. The twins are the same. They loved songs and food, which their dead brothers loved. Even though they were born only 10 minutes apart, Gillian mothered Jennifer in the same way as Johanna did with Jacqueline. Gillian seemed much more mature. It was also remarkable that Gillian and Jennifer loved to do their hair, and they did their father's hair in the same way as their deceased brothers. Their parents also noticed that the twins had car-related phobias. They were very careful when crossing the road, always holding each other's hands tightly. It was also noticed at school that the twin girls were similar in their behavior. Jacqueline learned to write before her death, but she was constantly holding the pencil in her fist, trying to write in this way. When the Pollock twins, Gillian and Jennifer, went to school, Gillian immediately held the pencil properly, and Jennifer grasped what was just said with her whole fist based on the fact that their environment also experienced the same as their parents. So it was not surprising that the Pollock twins quickly became famous in Hexham. Case attracted the attention of several researchers. The strange events described in the previous chapter were first reported in Hexham, then in Great Britain, and finally spread internationally. In April 1966, when the girls turned 8 years old, Dr. Hemedra Banasa, who was a researcher of sensory perception, telepathy, and reincarnation, traveled straight from India to the Pollock family with the parents and the girls. The man could not find an explanation as to why the girls show such a high degree of resemblance to their deceased sisters. The most detailed research in the case of the Pollock twins was carried out by a child psychologist named Dr. Stevenson. The man learned about the story in 1963 and immediately traveled to the scene in order to examine the twins personally. The doctor is considered a serious authority in the field. The man founded the Department of Perceptual Studies at the Star University in 1967. He investigated phenomena that cannot be explained by scientific theories but extended to phenomena such as telepathy, near-death experiences, and children's memories of previous lives as a doctor. He conducted more than 2,500 case studies over 40 years only on the subject of reincarnation and published 12 books. In the case of the Pollock twins, during his research, Dr. Stevenson came to the conclusion that in reincarnation research, cases involving children are much more authentic. This is because it is unlikely that such complex lies will be found. On the other hand, an adult who claims to be reincarnated can be influenced by things read in books or seen on TV. Stevenson documented all cases like that of the Pollock twins methodically and believed that children could be the key to understanding reincarnation. He wrote the following in this regard about reincarnation reports: in the vast majority of cases, this phenomenon can always be observed in the case of children. As we grow up, our memories in this direction fade more and more. The same happened in the case of Pollocks, as is usually the case. We all remember our very early childhood years barely or only dimly as adults. Neither Gillian nor Jennifer remembered what happened to them in their first years. According to John Pollock, when the girls were 13 years old, he first told them about their deceased siblings Johanna and Jacqueline and that they suspected the two girls were reincarnated in their bodies. The Pollock twins lived a completely normal life as adults. When they were in their 20s, they were visited by a doctor, but the two girls claimed that they had no memories of their previous lives. Nevertheless, they accepted their parents' belief that their sisters were reincarnated in them, but they themselves were skeptical about soul migration. With the permission of the two girls, Dr. Stevenson from time to time subjected them to examinations. Amazingly, in 1981, when Gillian was 23 years old during an examination, she experienced an inner vision. She saw a garden full of fruit trees and gave a precise description of the house in the garden. The girls' parents told them that this house and the description of the garden were identical to the house in which Johanna lived until they were 4 years old. The parents never told Gillian about this house, and she never visited it. Their parents passed away in the 80s. Although Dr. Stevenson visited them from time to time, the girls did not want to speak to anyone or regularly appear in the media. So, they slowly disappeared from public consciousness. Until his death, Dr. Stevenson maintained that the case of the Pollock twins is considered one of the most authentic reincarnation evidences, according to which Gillian and Jennifer were reincarnations of their deceased sisters. Is it really the case that Johanna and Jacqueline Pollock, who died in 1957, were reborn in the image of two blonde twin girls? What can be the explanation for the similar behavior of the little girls and Jennifer's birthmark and scar, which were located at a point on her body where there used to be a mole? How did they know the school and the playground where their sisters often visited? Why did they say that we went there or used to play there? How did they know the names of the babies named by their dead sisters? What caused their autophobia? Maybe because their bodies were different but their souls were the same? Here are a few theories about what could be the explanation for what has been said so far and the case of the twins. According to the skeptics, this is not proof of reincarnation at all. Many skeptics have drawn attention to the fact that after the death of their daughters, the Pollocks began to talk about the fact that the daughters of the dead would be reborn. And when the daughters were born, either consciously or involuntarily, they began to have that awareness to explain to Gillian and Jennifer that they are the reincarnations of their dead sisters. It is possible that they often talked about their lost daughters in front of the twin girls. And since the theory of babies is much more inclusive than we think, Gillian and Jennifer unconsciously began to behave like their dead sisters. The more they heard about them, the more they became like that, and their personalities were formed, like Johanna's and Jacqueline's. It could also be that during walks, they mentioned that look, Johanna and Jacqueline went to school here, or look, this was the girls' favorite playground. The twin girls memorized these dropped sentences as they got older and repeated them involuntarily. And the same is true for everything the girls do, the pencil held in fists, the similar interests to the phobia of cars. The Pollock parents wanted to make up for their lost daughters, so to speak, so the newly born Gillian and Jennifer were shaped in the image of the dead Johanna and Jacqueline. Let's add that the skeptic theory does not necessarily make the Pollock couple bad parents because of this, especially John. Twins were perfect subjects for this, but this theory also has its own counter-arguments. First of all, the parents kept believing that until the twin girls were 13 years old. Not a word was mentioned about Johanna and Jacqueline. People close to the family and Dr. Stevenson confirmed that they are not aware that the parents had talked about their dead daughters in front of Gillian and Jennifer. Not to mention that Florence herself was a skeptic and did not believe in reincarnation. Only later did he start to believe in the transmigration of the soul as a result of the events, but he struggled all the way because he found it difficult to contrast his own belief with what he saw with his own eyes. Since the church where Florence also attended completely rejected reincarnation. But perhaps there is an explanation for these suggestions. Let's take it from among the adults. Nobody really told Gillian and Jennifer about Johanna and Jacqueline's accident, but what about the children? Let's not forget that Gillian and Jennifer already had 4 older brothers when they were born. It is not possible that the 4 boys provided the twins with information about their dead sisters, because if the parents really never once brought up their dead sisters, would the 4 young boys have done the same? They lived together, they played, they communicated. It is almost impossible that they never once mentioned their dead siblings. For example, how the 2 girls named the toy dolls in the house. Let's assume that it was the case and that Gillian and Jennifer heard all the information about Johanna and Jacqueline from others, for example, from their father or from his boy brothers. But this theory does not provide the answer to every mystery. How could Florence give birth to fraternal twins one after the other? According to research, about 200% of women under the age of 25 give birth to twins between the ages of 35 and 39. 5% of them, and this rises to 7% over the age of 40. Florence was in her 30s when she gave birth to Gillian and Jennifer. I wonder what the chances of this were a little more than a year after Johann and Jacqueline's death. And what can be the explanation for the fact that the doctor who examined him only detected one heart sound the whole time? Maybe the surgery or the medical instruments of the time were wrong. Not to mention the birthmark on Jennifer's waist and the defect resembling a scar on her forehead. How is it possible that these things were in the same places on her body? Dr. Stevenson noted in one of his books that in 35% of the reincarnation cases he examined, a birthmark was in the same place on a person's body as it was on their deceased brother. Despite this, nowadays science is officially not acknowledging evidence that makes the existence of reincarnation probable. Although many authorities have already researched the subject, there is currently no specific 100% proven research method that could reveal the secret of soul migration. But we do not know a lot about our minds, our souls, and the world around us. It is enough if let's look at perception beyond human, since many animals, such as dogs, cats, pigs, bats, have abilities that humans are not capable of, so the majority of people are unable to perceive, absorb, and understand paranormal phenomena related to reincarnation, telepathy, or even spontaneous self-immolation. One of the greatest weaknesses of the human mind is that it creates concepts that fit into its beliefs, and then makes itself believe that it is the only absolute truth. And in many cases, the truth can exceed the limits of the human mind. Perhaps the proof of this can be the fascinating and mysterious case of the Pollock twins? Write your opinion about the case in the comments.